Stop arguing with reality, a Buddha reflection. I didn't realize how often I was quietly arguing with life. Not out loud, not dramatically, but in small, constant ways. This shouldn't be happening. This was supposed to go differently. Something about this moment feels wrong. For a long time, I thought the tension I carried came from life itself. From things not working out, from people being unpredictable, from plans falling apart. But slowly, something became clear. It wasn't life I was fighting. It was reality, exactly as it already was. And the moment I began to see that, something inside me started to soften. The quiet argument. You may not have noticed it at first, the way the mind gently leans forward into each moment, as if negotiating with it. As if life were something you could adjust, revise, or quietly persuade into a different shape. You wake up, and something already feels slightly off. The day has not unfolded yet, but the mind has begun its quiet whisper. This should go well. That should not happen. I hope this turns out the way I expect. And within these soft thoughts, a subtle tension begins to form. The Buddha saw this not as a problem to fix, but as something to understand. You are not disturbed because life is difficult. You are disturbed because the mind is already leaning away from what has not even happened yet, already preparing its argument. And in that moment, if you look closely, you may begin to see it, not as a flaw, but as a habit. A habit of negotiating with reality before it even arrives. Invisible agreements. As the day unfolds, something small does not go as expected. A message arrives late. A plan shifts. Someone responds in a way you did not anticipate, and almost instantly, the mind reacts. This was not supposed to happen. The Buddha gently pointed to this moment, not to correct it, but to illuminate it. Long before the moment arrived, the mind had already written a quiet agreement. A version of how things should unfold, a private contract with life. But life never signed that contract. You may begin to notice how often disappointment is not caused by the moment itself, but by the silent expectation that came before it. Like planting a seed in dry soil and expecting it to bloom, then feeling betrayed when it does not. And slowly, a new kind of seeing begins. Not judgment, not correction, just recognition. The agreement was imagined. The moment is real. The weight of should. Suffering grows where the mind insists the moment should be other than it is. There is a particular heaviness in the word should. It carries a quiet demand, a belief that life has taken a wrong turn. You may feel it in your chest, in the tightening of breath, in the subtle contraction when something does not match your expectation. The mind begins its quiet repetition. This should not be happening. This should be different. The Buddha did not ask you to remove these thoughts. He invited you to see them clearly. To notice how each should creates a small friction against what already exists. Like pushing against a river that continues to flow. And in that noticing, something softens. Not because the moment changed, but because the pressure of insisting begins to loosen. The river flows, and for a moment, you are no longer pushing against it. The collapse of the script. There are moments in life when something larger does not go as planned. A relationship shifts. An effort does not lead where you hoped. A path you trusted begins to dissolve. And with it, something inside you feels like it collapses. The Buddha understood this not as failure, but as the breaking of an illusion. The script was never real, though it felt deeply true. It lived in the mind, repeated so often it became a kind of certainty. You may begin to see how pain arises not only from what happened, but from the loss of what you believed would happen. The mind grieves not just reality, but imagination. Like building a house in the clouds, then feeling the fall when the wind moves through it. And yet, in that collapse, there is space. Space to see what is actually here, rather than what was supposed to be. The second layer. Something unpleasant happens. That is the first layer. It is simple, direct, part of life. But then the mind begins. Why did this happen? This should not be happening. This always happens to me. The Buddha pointed to this second layer with great care, not to remove pain, but to reveal how suffering multiplies. The event is one thing. The resistance to it is another. Like rain falling on the surface of water, the rain is natural, but the waves that follow, the turbulence, that is something added. You may begin to notice how much of what you feel is not the moment itself, but the mind's response to it. The story, the protest, the quiet refusal. And in seeing this, something becomes possible, not control, but understanding. Insight and Awareness Quiz. After you have listened, open the quiz tab. The questions reveal how you interpreted what you heard and invite you to notice the hidden logic in your reactions. Then, share your score in the comments. The pause that changes everything. In the moment the mind stops resisting, the world softens. There is a small space, almost invisible, between what happens and how the mind reacts. Most of the time, it is missed. But sometimes, just for a moment, the reaction pauses. The Buddha lived within that pause, not as an escape, but as clarity, a simple recognition. This is what is happening. No argument, no correction, just seeing. You may begin to experiment with this, gently. When something does not go as expected, instead of moving immediately into resistance, there is a brief stillness, a quiet acknowledgement. This is here. And in that moment, something shifts. The tension does not need to tighten. The mind does not need to fight. The moment is allowed to exist just as it is. And surprisingly, that allowance feels like relief. The river that cannot be held. Life moves like water, always changing, never holding its shape for long. Yet the mind tries to hold it still. You may notice this in small ways, wanting a moment to last longer, wanting a feeling to remain, wanting a situation to stay as it is. And when it changes, as it always does, something inside resists. The Buddha observed this with quiet precision. The suffering is not in the movement of life. It is in the attempt to stop that movement. Like trying to hold a river in your hands. The more tightly you grasp, the more quickly it slips away. But when the hands open, the river is still there, flowing, moving, alive. And you are no longer in conflict with it. The subtle tightening. Even when you understand this, something still remains. A quiet tightening, almost unnoticed. It appears as a small discomfort, a sense that something about this moment is not quite right. Not wrong enough to protest loudly, but not accepted fully either. The Buddha invited a deeper awareness here, to notice not just the obvious resistance, but the subtle one. The almost invisible tension that lingers beneath the surface. Like a string pulled slightly too tight. You may begin to feel this in the body, in the breath that does not fully release, in the shoulders that hold just a bit of weight. And as awareness rests there, gently, without trying to change it, the tightening begins to soften. Not forced, not controlled, just seen. And in being seen, it begins to dissolve. Stories over reality. The mind creates a world, then forgets it created it. A simple event occurs. A word is spoken. A message is delayed. A look is misunderstood. And almost instantly, the mind builds a story. They meant this. This will lead to that. Something is wrong. The Buddha saw how quickly the mind moves from reality into interpretation. How it replaces what happened with what it believes happened. You may begin to notice this movement, the moment when reality ends and the story begins. Like watching clouds form in a clear sky. And as you watch, something becomes clear. The story feels real, but it is constructed. It carries emotion, but not always truth. And in that recognition, a space opens. A space where you can return, gently, to what actually is. The illusion of control. There is a quiet belief that if you think enough, plan enough, prepare enough, life will unfold in a certain way. That control is possible. The Buddha did not deny effort, but he revealed something deeper. Life moves through countless conditions, most of which you do not control. You may begin to see how exhausting it is to hold the belief that everything should align with your effort. How each unexpected moment feels like a failure of control. Like trying to direct the wind. And slowly, a different understanding appears. Effort remains, but control softens. Action continues, but without the demand that life must obey. And in that softening, there is ease. The freedom of allowing. When the mind stops insisting, something unexpected appears. Space. Not empty in a cold way, but open, spacious. Like a sky no longer filled with constant storms. The Buddha described this not as withdrawal, but as freedom. The freedom to let things be as they are, without immediately needing to change them. You may begin to feel this in simple moments, sitting without needing the moment to be different. Listening without needing to correct what is heard. Like resting beside a river, watching it flow without needing to step in. And in that allowing, the mind becomes lighter. Not because life has changed, but because the burden of resistance has been set down. The clarity beneath calm. When resistance ends, clarity does not need to be created. It is already there. Calm is often misunderstood as something to achieve. Something to build or reach. But the Buddha pointed in another direction. Calm is what remains when the struggle ends. You may begin to notice that clarity does not come from forcing the mind to be still. It comes from no longer disturbing it. Like water settling when the wind stops. And beneath that calm, there is intelligence, a quiet knowing of what to do, what to say, when to move, when to wait. Not driven by urgency, but guided by understanding. And this clarity feels different, not sharp or forceful, but steady, reliable. The gentle response. Without resistance, response changes. You may notice that when the mind is not arguing with reality, it becomes easier to act wisely. Not reactively, not impulsively, but with a kind of natural precision. The Buddha lived within this alignment, action arising not from tension, but from clarity. Like a tree bending with the wind rather than breaking against it. You still speak, you still decide, you still move through life, but something has shifted. The movement is no longer driven by the need to correct reality, but by the understanding of it. And that difference changes everything. The end of the argument. At some point, quietly, the argument begins to fade. Not because you forced it to stop, but because you have seen it clearly so many times that it no longer holds the same power. The Buddha did not silence the mind. He revealed its patterns until they softened on their own. You may begin to feel moments where nothing needs to be different, where the present moment is enough, not perfect, but complete. Like the surface of a lake undisturbed. And in that stillness, there is no negotiation, no demand, just presence. And that presence feels like peace. The freedom already here. Freedom is not found in changing the world, but in no longer resisting it. In the end, nothing extraordinary has happened. Life is still moving, moments still change, challenges still appear. But the mind has changed its relationship to it all. You are no longer negotiating with reality, no longer trying to rewrite what already is. And in that release, something profound becomes visible. Freedom was never in control, it was in understanding. Like stepping out of a current you did not realize you were fighting. And now, there is a quiet trust. In timing, in change, in the unfolding of things as they are. Not passive, not detached, but deeply aligned. A calm that does not depend on circumstances. A clarity that does not need to be forced. A way of being that the Buddha quietly pointed to, not as something to believe, but as something you can see for yourself again and again in the simplicity of this moment. This is Buddha Reflections, where philosophy, insight, and lived experience meet to explore mind, impermanence, and release. The conversation doesn't end here. Visit the quiz tab and share your score in the comments. Thanks for your time. It's been a delight. What should we explore next? Comment, share, and save your insight. Subscribe to Orbital Dharma and keep your thoughts bright.